Can you hear me, guys? Let's look at the chat. Hello, Nord Junction. Okay, so shall I just repeat the whole thing, because I think I wasn't audible. Okay, let's quickly go through the game again. So d4 was played, and f6, c4, e6, and f3, d5, knight c3, dc4, e4, normal theory, b5. It's an interesting line. e5, knight d5, and knight into b5. So this was played in a previous game also yesterday, and I think Nakamura won the game with black, and even in this game Nakamura won. So this is something that is working for him, this opening. Knight b6, and yesterday we saw a3 was played. Just a moment, guys. So yesterday we saw a3 was played, and later on knight c6 and knight bishop e3, all of those moves were played, and eventually Nakamura won with a lot of complexities. Here Carlsen changed with a4, so he is now playing a4 so that he can play a5 and attack this knight, which has moved a lot from g8 to f6 to d5 to b6. Queen d7 was played. Here the idea is, I think, to play queen c6 and then play bishop b7, so to have some sort of battery on this diagonal here. Bishop e2 was played, a normal developing move. He wants to castle as soon as possible. Knight c6 was played, another developing move, and castles was played by white. So I think here knight a5 was something that was very similar in the yesterday's game, and this is round number 26, guys, and Carlsen versus Nakamura won this game with black. Knight g5 was played. So now white, I think, wants to play bishop f3 and knight e4. So he wants his knight to be on a good square on e4, because it's not that easy to move this knight from e4, and also it can jump to c5 later on. h6 was played to drive away the knight from the square, because another threat here was something like bishop h5, and f7 is a weak pawn. h6, knight e4, bishop b7 was played, normal developing move, and also it kind of targets this g2 square in a way. Knight c5 was played, bishop into c5, d into c5. So here as a general rule, you can see that this knight has moved 1, 2, 3 and 4 times, and this bishop has not really moved. So when you capture this, you get 3 moves. So that's the reason he captured this. So he got four moves sort of, and white doesn't really have that advantage now of being white, because even though black played knight f6, knight d5, knight b6, he wasted a lot of moves. But well, knight d5 is played, and now rook a3. So it's a very typical rook lift in such positions, and this rook has different plans. It can go to g3, it can even maybe placed on f3, like bishop h5, rook f3 is possible. And another plan for white here could be f4, f5 and break this pawn structure sort of. He can even play something like b3, take this break, bishop d2, and it would take a lot of time to place this rook on a good square. So rook a3 was like a shortcut, you can say, because if in normal situation, if he had to develop this rook, he would have to remove his bishop, his queen, and then only he could play rook d1. But in this case, he can just directly play rook g3, which is a great square for the rook, and g file is a great semi-open file for the rook. Also, after castles, there will be some attacking prospects for white. a6 was played to drive away the b5 knight, which is causing some issues because of the c7 square. And in general, if ever black wants to long castle, then a7 was a weak pawn. Here knight d4 was played. I'm guessing now knight d4, the idea is to play bishop d2, and now this knight has some problems because it can go to c6, but it cannot really go to b3, and the plan of playing knight a5 was to go to b3. So this is the plan. Knight e7 was played, making sure that I can get a knight on c6, and even now long castle can be a threat, pinning this knight here. So queen d2 was played. As I mentioned, this knight on a5 can be very vulnerable to attack. Queen d5 was played. So another point of playing knight e7 was to vacate the square for the queen. And now, as you can see, the g2 is threatened. g2 is vulnerable, and what do you think should white play here? You can write down in chat. Vijay, I think he will not castle. He will wait. What do you think should white play here, guys? I think now it's a good time to play rook g3, because that's why you brought your rook there. So rook g3 should be played. And now this move has two purposes. One is to defend and other one is to attack. So now it's difficult for black to castle here, because if he castles, then queen into h6 and this g7 pawn will be weak. Queen into c5 was played because he got the free pawn. And now there was one very interesting move, so you can try to think what he played. Node junction here, I think you mean instead of rook g3, bishop f3, right? Bishop f3 is possible, but even for bishop f3, I can just play queen into c5, and after bishop takes, I can even play queen into e5, and after queen takes any of the pawn, bishop takes into b7, knight into b7, I can long castle, and this d4 knight will be under attack. With rook g7, I can also play later rook g4. So I have this move to protect this d4 knight, and also I am kind of attacking, right? So if you take the pawn, even I can capture this pawn, so I can get the pawn back. Now b4 was played. So b4 is very interesting, and it is a very typical move in such positions where you want to open, because you have two bishops and you should open the position for attacking. C into b3 and bishop a3 was played. So now you can see that a5 knight is still under attack. Now it's protected, but it's still very vulnerable, and if this knight is lost, then the b3 pawn will be lost. Even this whole complex of squares, c7, b7, d7, all of these squares will be suddenly weak. So bishop a3 was played, and now if queen into a3, then queen into a5, so bishop d5, and now rook into g7. So after rook into g7, you are threatening to play bishop h5 or something like queen into c7. So you have a lot of possibilities, and from black's point of view, here you can protect two pawns. Like you can even protect this pawn and you can protect this pawn, but you should choose the pawn that is far advanced, because this is a potential queen. It queens in just two moves, and it is this pawn is going to take more moves to queen. So that's the reason this pawn should be protected. Rook into g7, and now c5 was played. c5 to drive away the knight. But Carlsen, I think Carlsen thought that he can have enough compensation even after sacrificing the piece. He will have a lot of attack because after this move, black cannot really castle. Even if he castles, like right now he can't, but just imagine if he castles on the queen side, then there can be threats, and that's the reason he thought maybe sacrificing piece is a good thing to do. What do you think? Like, was it a good move or a bad move? Keep liking, guys, keep commenting so that more people will join us. Okay, so here king d7 was played, and Nakamura feels that even if his king is in the center, he's probably winning because he's a piece up, and why not? He has these two strong pawns which are passed pawns, and his king is considerably safe because there's no coordination in white's pieces. Bishop g4 was played. I think now the idea is to just play queen into d5, because as you can see there's a pin here, because this cannot capture. There's a pin with the bishop and even with the rook, so this bishop is only protected by two pieces and both of them are pinned, so this is the threat. And so king c6 was played. So king c6, and there is no pin on the knight, and the king protects this bishop. And now Carlsen thought for a while and captured on e6 because he realized there is nothing that he can do. His queen is preventing the king from going to c7, but it's not really active here. It's on the edge of the board. And after bishop into e6, rook f6, and king d7 was played. Queen b6 was played, and after bishop d5, rook d6, king e8, Carlsen captured here with rook into d5, and after knight into d5 he played queen c6 check. So after king e7 he repeated twice like this, and it's a good idea to repeat twice because you're putting psychological pressure on your opponent. He thinks that you might take the draw, and there can be some slight psychological pressure. So king f5 was played on the third time by Nakamura, so he denied the draw. And after queen into d5, to me it looks as if white has some compensation, but this rook on f1 is not really helping. So the king is out in the open, and that is the only compensation that I can say for the rook. And these two pawns are really strong. You can comment, guys. Yeah, it's probably good. Carlsen usually doesn't go wrong. It's very rare that he goes wrong. Okay, so here queen e7 was played, and Nakamura just wants to capture this pawn. He's okay giving this pawn because once he gets this pawn, the king can be safe because this rook, this e6 threat is not there, and even f4, g4 threats are no longer possible if I get this pawn. And check, e6 was a discovered check. King g6 was played, and now queen e4 check. Here I think Carlsen is just looking for perpetual checks, so he's already playing for a draw here. Queen into d4, king g8 was played, and now queen g4 check, queen g7. So now finally the queen comes in between the check and prevents it. Right now this rook is out of play, but this pawn is again very strong, and this rook is the only rook that is going to help it. Also e6 is strong because it's preventing king f7, and with white I think the plan is to play f4, rook f3, rook g3, or f4 f5 later on. Now the threat here is to play e7, but Nakamura completely ignores it and he just plays b2 because he feels that this b2 pawn is way more important than preventing this discovered check. f4 is played. So as I mentioned, f4, f5, and as a rule, just 2 pawns on 6th rank are equivalent to a rook. So that's what he's trying for, I guess. And now rook b8, so threatening this move here, b1. And now queen e4, preventing this b1. Rook h7 is played. I think rook h7 is so that e7 can be prevented. So both the players are preventing the moves and they are looking for opponents' ideas and then preventing them. So Nakamura realized that e7 is a threat here and that's the reason he prevented it. So it's called prophylaxis. Rook h7, rook b1. Queen b7 was played, and if he exchanges, it's just bad because black will remain with the rook extra. Queen e2 and rook c7. So now rook c1 is a threat which cannot be prevented, and even if it's prevented, there are a lot of threats like queen b6 or even rook c2 can be a threat in case of queen e3. So that's the reason why Carlsen resigned and he was white, and Nakamura defeated Carlsen with black. So this was one of the games. Let's have a look at another game. You can comment down below, guys. You can write in the live chat and let me know. Keep liking, guys, so that more people will join us. Okay, so 8 people must have joined so far, I'm guessing, because 8 likes. Okay, let's move on to the next game, and give me a moment. Let's see how Carlsen defeated Nakamura with white. So c4 was played. c4 e5. We have English opening, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, d5, takes, knight f3, knight c6. Okay, castles, knight b6, b3, normal opening theory. Here he just wants to develop bishop b2 and then have control on this diagonal. So two fianchetto bishops are very strong because they control the central squares. Like bishop b2 controls e5 and d4, bishop g2 controls e4 and d5. Bishop e6 is played, queen c2 is played. I think the idea of queen c2 is to have d4 and rook d1, and also maybe some pressure here on the c6 knight. Queen d7 was played. So black probably wants to long castle and he wants to have strong hold on this d open file, semi open file. Rook d1, as I said, d4 is the plan. Long castles is played, knight c3, and now f6 was played. So playing f6 is good because you are releasing this knight, and knight into e5 is no longer possible. Also, it's a good idea to have this pawn structure, like this is very solid against this fianchetto, because even if the bishop goes to b2, this pawn structure is rock solid and he can't really do much. This bishop b2 is slightly restricted because of this pawn structure here. d4 was played. So you take that break, pawn break, and e into d4, bishop b2, bishop f5 is played. Okay guys, so the idea of bishop f5 is to have something like d3 at some point. Guys, I'll just be back. Give me a moment. You can keep commenting. I'll just be back, guys. Get some water. Okay, guys, I'm back. Okay, so bishop f5 was played by Nakamura. I think his idea is to play something like d3, and probably he wants to give white the isolated pawn. So that's the reason he played bishop f5, queen c1, and now d3. As I said, he probably wants to give white isolated pawn. Now bishop h3, so he goes for the attack, and right now white has this pawn and he should be the one attacking. And now the just a moment, guys. Now actually the material is equal, and it's not like he has sacrificed, it's not like black has sacrificed the d3 pawn, so it's slightly better for black, I guess. And bishop h1 is played. You should not exchange this bishop because the kings have castled on opposite side, and h5 h4 can be very risky because this pieces here are slightly they are trapped sort of, because this rook doesn't really come in the game very quickly. And here bishop g4 was played again. So I think with bishop g4 the idea is to play knight d4 and use this pin. So he plays d4 himself, so that knight d4 is not possible. He blocks the square with his own pawn, and if now knight d4, you can just capture with the rook, so there is no pin and there's attack on this queen here. Bishop b4 was played, so you can see both the bishops are sort of pinning the knights, attacking them. This is not a pin, but it is controlling this e1 square, so the rook really can't go to e1 because it will be under a pin then, this knight. And these two bishops are on the fianchet. These two bishops are on the open, the longest diagonal, that is the fianchet of bishops. And queen e6, I'm sorry guys, d5, bishop into c3, queen into c3. Now you can see that now white is probably doing fine after this capture, because suddenly his pawn is advanced. Now he's going to attack, and rook c1 is in order. Maybe something like knight d4 too, or a4, b4. Soon white will attack, and it will be very strong because this bishop on h1 looks very inactive right now. But if it's opened with d6, then b7 will be a weak pawn and it will be a weakness. Knight into d5, queen c4, and now he's targeting this g4 bishop and the knight on d5. Bishop e6 is played, knight d4, bishop f7, knight into c6, and now you can see here he could have captured, but capturing this meant that after rook into d4, rook d1 would cause a lot of problems for this knight because it's pinned. And it's not just pinned on the d file, also this bishop h1 is suddenly active, and you can sense some trouble on this b7 square. So bishop f7 and knight into c6, queen into c6, and here Carlsen doesn't capture, because if he captures, then after b into c6, even though these pawns are double pawns, this knight is very strong because it is on the outpost square, because this cannot be driven off by any of the pawns. There are no pawns on e or c file, guys, so that is why it's an outpost for the knight. And knights are usually very active if they are posted on outposts. Queen g4 was played. Queen e6. Let's take a few questions, guys. You can comment down. Okay, so we have 10 likes, so 10 people watching, I think. Okay, so here queen e6 was played. He just wants to go to the end game because he's a pawn up and he wants to exchange the queens. But white just captures on g7 and he takes back the pawn, and he's not afraid of any attack coming on the king. He just takes the pawn, even though rook g8 and there can be some attack on this g file. He is okay with it because he can calculate that and he's fine with that. So rook g8 was played, and now if queen into h7 is played, then he would play rook h8. So in such positions, I think queen into h7 is wrong because this h2 pawn will be under a lot of attack. Queen into h7, rook h8, queen moves anywhere, and then queen h3. So queen h2 can be a mate. So it's okay to capture one of the pawns. Don't usually capture two pawns because it will completely open the king side and it will be great for your opponent. So queen h6 was played, keeping that in mind. Queen f5 was played. So I think the idea with queen f5 is to play something like queen c2 or maybe rook g5 and then block this queen here, bishop g2, and now the threat was to play bishop h3. So that's the reason he played king b8. So he prevented that. Now again, this is an example of prophylaxis because he thought about what his opponent was going to do and he realized that bishop h3 is something that his opponent is threatening. I'm talking about Nakamura, guys. So Nakamura realized that bishop h3 is a threat, and that's why he played king b8. So that is preventing your opponent's idea, which is prophylaxis. Rook d4 was played. So now with rook d4, I think the idea is to play something like rook d1 or maybe queen d2 and have some pressure on this knight here. Rook e1 was played and queen d2, as I mentioned. So c6 and c6 also, this is an outpost again, but with c6 and the king, the queen still on board, it is going to be difficult for black to defend because of the bishops. Two bishops are very strong attackers. They control a lot of squares and they are a great weapon. So here b4 was played. Now that c6 has been provoked, so now there's some weakness, and now if you can break this pawn structure, these two pawns, then you should do it with b4. So idea of b4 is to play b5 and then ruin this pawn structure. Queen e6 was played. I'm so sorry, guys. Queen h5 was played. Queen e6 was a possibility. I think the idea here is to play rook e2 and take control of the square. So rook e1 was played to avoid that. Again, prophylaxis. Rook into e1, queen into e1, rook e8, rook e4, and after rook e4, I think Carlsen is fine exchanging because again he has the bishop pair and he has the double bishop advantage, which was very great in the endgame. Rook into e4, bishop into e4. After queen into e4, there can be some problems with queen d1, so he just captures with the bishop. So there is no issue on the back rank. This is the back rank for white and this is the back rank for black. bishop g6 was played. Bishop g2, you shouldn't exchange the bishop pair that you have. Queen f5. So now I think idea is to play something like queen c2 and or maybe queen b1, and after queen into b1, bishop into b1, both of these pawns are attacked. So b4 and e2 both are under attack. a3 is played. Do you have any questions, guys? You can ask them right now. Keep liking, guys, and keep commenting. More people will join us. Okay, so someone subscribe to our channel. Okay, guys, so I'm going to add one of my friends now on the stream, and I'm going to stop this stream after finishing the game, obviously. So let's quickly move forward with the game. Now queen d3 was played. So idea of queen d3 is to play bishop h5 and bishop f3. That's what I guess it is. And he wants to exchange this bishop because it's a very powerful piece. h4 is played, and it's a general rule. This is called as breakwater, and it is very difficult to break this. So breakwater is basically like a dam, like you prevent any of the pawn advances by black by playing this. Also, you threaten yourself to play h5, g4 and a lot of other moves. So this is a very nice pawn structure to have, and especially in the end game, not in the opening or middle game, because you shouldn't move too many pawns where you have castled, because it creates a lot of weakness. King c7 was played. So he's getting the king close to the game, because as we move towards the end game, the king should be very active, and the active your king is, the better you are in the end game. King h2 was played, and he, I think, is trying to play g4 and h5, or maybe queen h1 also. I don't really know what Carlsen's plan here was with king h2, or maybe he just wants to play f4 and g4, so no queen e3 or knight e3 and stuff like that. Queen b1. Okay, I got the idea. So here he didn't want to exchange the queens. After queen b1, he would have to exchange the queens, and king h2 kind of prevents that, because queen b1, then you can just move your queen, otherwise you would have to capture. So queen d2 was not possible if the king was on g1. And now bishop e4, and here bishop into f6 is played. So as you can see here, I think Nakamura missed this move, because after knight into f6 here, if he played knight f6, then I had this queen f4 move, so attacking both the knight and giving the check, so double attack. And after bishop into g2, king into g2, again knight into f6 is not possible because of queen f4 check, and I'm winning a pawn. And even though the game will end up in a queen pawn ending, even in the queen ending, I'll have a pawn up, and with this majority here against this one pawn, so 3 pawn versus 1 pawn, I'm sure white will easily win the game. He will have a lot of advantage. So king b6 was played, just to make sure. Now knight into f6 is still not a threat, because queen d4 can be played, but he probably just wants to activate the king. He wants to play king b5, king a4 and capture this a3 pawn. Then bishop d4 was played. I'll just have a sip of water, guys. You can comment down, guys. Okay, so after, just a moment, after bishop d4, king b5 was played. So black here is just trying to get the king to a3 pawn, near the a3 pawn, so that he can capture the a3 pawn, and the position will again be equal, because 3 versus 1, and then it would be 3 versus this just b4 pawn, which is also very loose after the a3 pawn is lost. But bishop into a7 and king a4, he just protects the pawn with bishop c5 and b5. Now you can see the king on a4 is trapped, because king into a3 is possible, but again the king won't be able to go to the king side, like it is trapped on this a file, and he has very limited space already. So king into a3, Carlsen plays queen e6 here, which is a great move. I was even wondering if queen e8 is possible, and to me it looked very much possible, but maybe he had some different plans with queen e6. Queen e6, queen d3, and queen into c6 was played. Just you should remember that with knight and queen, look out for such moves like knight f4 and then queen g6 perpetual. So if he ever plays knight f4, you capture, then there can be some chances of perpetual. For example, this queen was on e2, then knight f4 is possible, because he takes, then you have queen g4 and then the perpetual check. So the game will end in a draw. So always be on the look for such moves, guys. King b3 was played, queen e6, and now he puts a trap. Carlsen realizes that. Can you spot the trap, guys? Can someone write down in the chat what's the trap here? If it's black to play, what will black play? Right now it's white to play, but what would black play if it was black to play? There's a trap here. Am I audible, guys? So this is my first time streaming, so you can ask me questions, guys. Okay, so here the idea of black is to play knight f4, and after knight f4 it's a fork and it's a discovered attack. So I could call it a discovered check, but it's a discovered attack and a check. So if the king was here and the queen was here, then moving the knight would mean it's a discovered check, but this piece is under attack, so discovered attack. And queen f5 was played, so he realized that. Again, prophylaxis, a small example we can see. Now he captures knight into b4, and here after king into b4, it's very important for white to give the right checks and to play properly, because otherwise the b5 pawn is pretty strong and it's already on the 5th rank. After queen into h7, black is 2 pawns down, but if he manages to play his pawn as quickly as possible to b3 or b2, it will create a lot of pressure on white. Queen d5 check, king h2, and as you saw, this breakwater helps the king to escape. Had the pawn been on h2, it would probably have been a draw because of the perpetual. Not a draw because king can go to h3, but still king h2 is safer, and it kind of accommodates the king properly. On h2, it's tucked in properly. And now king a3 is played in order to play b4 and advance the pawn. So you vacate the square for the pawn. Queen a7 check is played, king b2, queen g7, and now king a2. So here again you try to push this pawn. So queen h7 was coming in between, but by giving checks, you kind of improved the queen's position. And now he played queen g5. So after queen g5, queen into g5, h into g5, b4, g6, b3, g7, b2, and g8 is a check. So that's why it works. And he cannot capture. And queen c5, queen e2, h5. So he advances the h pawn. Black cannot really advance, because even if he does, you can just play h6, b3, h7, b2, h8 queens, b1 queens, and you can play queen a8. We'll see 4 queens on the board, but king on a2 is more open than the king on h2. So king on h2 is pretty safe, and it will be black who will lose because of the exposed king. Queen b2 was played to have control on the h8 square, and also to support this pawn. But because of queen b2, now black will again have to move the queen to play b2, because he'll waste a move. And h6, b4, h7. Now he played queen f6. So here b3 was possible, but I think it just already lost for black. So queen f6 was played, maybe to have some checks, or maybe to find some counterplay. Now b3, queen a7, and black resigned here, because after king b1 I can just play queen a8, and h8 won't be it's not possible to stop h8. And later on I'll take this queen and give up my queen for this b pawn if required, and then I can just promote g or f pawns and win the game. So this was it for today, guys. These were the 2 games that we analyzed today, and tomorrow we'll analyze a few more games. This was the first time we analyzed something and we streamed something on Chess Assist. So we'll do it tomorrow as well. You can join in at 10:30, guys, and we'll analyze the games, and we'll also look at a few Olympiad games. My partner Sahil will also join. He'll help us with the analysis, and we'll discuss a lot of things, and hopefully it will be fun. Good luck, guys. Take care. Good night.